The valley looked like a painting that morning, endless green fields stretching to the horizon, sunlight breaking gently through the thinning clouds. The Yellowstone River glistened like a silver ribbon, calm for once, after weeks of heavy rain. To anyone passing through it, seemed peaceful, almost ordinary. But sometimes, peace is only the silence before something breaks. And then there was Max. Max wasn't just any golden Labrador. To strangers, he was an ordinary dog, sandy fur, warm eyes, and that goofy wag of the tail that could melt even the hardest heart. But to Daniel Hayes, a quiet park ranger who had spent more years alone in the wilderness than around people, Max was more than a companion. He was family, partner, lifeline, and sometimes an unexplainable voice of instinct that Daniel had learned never to ignore. Locals said animals could listen to the earth better than any man. Daniel used to laugh at that. But after seeing Max predict storms before the sky even darkened, or bark until Daniel avoided trails later swallowed by landslides, he stopped laughing. Max didn't just listen to the earth, he carried its warnings. That morning, the Golden Lab was restless. He paced near the cabin door, ears pricked, eyes never leaving the distant shimmer of the river. Daniel poured coffee, trying to shake off the long night, but Max's unease unsettled him. There was something in the air, a thickness like the valley itself was holding its breath. And here's the hook. While the world was waking slowly, something unthinkable was already in motion. A chain of events that would test trust, shatter fear, and rewrite the line between human and animal. And at the center of it all wasn't the ranger, but the dog. Max, the Golden Labrador, was about to do something no one could have predicted. Because just a few miles downstream, hidden by the mist and mud, life was clinging desperately to survival. And only Max seemed to know it. Daniel finally gave in. He clipped on Max's leash, muttering, "All right, buddy, let's see what's got you spooked." He thought it was just another restless day, a walk to calm his anxious dog. Maybe a false alarm. But he was wrong. Dead wrong. Because this was no ordinary morning walk. It was the first step into a storm that had already broken one they couldn't yet see. And soon the calm valley would erupt into chaos. What Daniel and Max didn't know yet was that a small life, fragile, helpless, was already caught in the fury of the river. And when the current roared, the Golden Lab would be the first to hear its cry. The walk started quietly enough. The gravel crunched under Daniel's boots. The leash tugged rhythmically as Max pulled him along. Birds were still shaking rain from their feathers, and the air smelled of pine and wet earth. Nothing looked out of place. Nothing seemed wrong. But Max knew better. His ears pricked, his body stiffened, and suddenly he bolted forward, dragging Daniel down the muddy path. "Easy, boy," Daniel called. But the Labrador was relentless, barking with a pitch Daniel had never heard before. Sharp, frantic, desperate. Then came the sound. At first, it was almost swallowed by the roar of the swollen Yellowstone River. A high-pitched cry, weak yet piercing. It wasn't the call of a bird. It wasn't the growl of a predator. It was the cry of something young, something fighting to live. Through the fog rising off the riverbank, Daniel saw it, a tiny black bear cub clinging to a half-submerged branch, its claws slipping, its eyes wide with terror. Each second the rushing current pulled harder, threatening to tear it away. On the far bank, the mother bear stood pacing, moaning, roaring. She lunged once into the water, then pulled back, nearly swept under. Her massive strength meant nothing against the fury of the river, and so she bellowed again, a sound so raw it rattled Daniel's chest. But here's the twist. The mother wasn't looking only at her cub. She was looking straight across the river, at Daniel and Max. Daniel froze. Every instinct screamed at him to stay back. This was a wild bear, and approaching could mean disaster. But Max didn't hesitate. He barked low and steady, not aggressive, almost like a message. The bear's ears twitched. For a moment, she stopped pacing. She stared at Max, not at Daniel, not at the rope in his hands, but at the dog. It was as if she understood. Daniel whispered, "You've got to be kidding me. She's asking us." His heart pounded, but Max stood his ground, golden fur, bristling tail lowered in respect. The cub wailed again, slipping further, and the river roared louder, as if mocking the delay. The mother let out a final guttural cry, then turned her gaze back to Max, pleading desperate. Daniel realized the impossible trust in this moment depended not on him, but on his dog. And that was the true danger, because if Max stepped forward, there was no turning back. With the current roaring and a life on the line, Daniel grabbed the rope. But before he could act, Max made the unthinkable choice, one that would hurl them both straight into the torrent. The rope burned in Daniel's hands as he fumbled with the knot, his pulse hammering in his ears. He knew the current could crush him in seconds. One wrong step, and he'd be just another body swallowed by the Yellowstone River. Logic screamed at him to stay back, to wait, to call for backup. But logic doesn't matter when a life is dangling by a thread. Then Max moved. Without command, without hesitation, the golden Labrador lunged forward. His paws splashed into the icy torrent, and in an instant, the leash ripped out of Daniel's hands. "Max!" Daniel shouted, heart dropping, but the dog was already chest-deep, swimming against the current. And that's when Daniel saw something he would never forget. The mother bear stopped pacing. Instead of roaring, she stilled, watching Max's eyes locked as though she'd placed her cub's fate not in the river, not in the ranger, but in this dog. Daniel's breath caught. The twist was brutal, and undeniable trust in that moment did not rest on him, the trained human rescuer. It rested entirely on a Labrador's courage. The cub squealed again, claws slipping from the branch. The water surged, snapping wood like matchsticks. Daniel knew he had no time left. If Max drowned, if the cub disappeared under those waves, he would carry that guilt forever. He tied the rope to his waist, praying the knots would hold. Then, driven not by training, but by sheer refusal to let his partner die alone, Daniel plunged after him. The water hit like a wall of stone, slamming his chest, stealing his breath. The current dragged at him, trying to twist his body under. He fought for air, eyes stinging, every muscle screaming. Through the spray, He glimpsed Max, head barely above water, pushing forward with powerful strokes, barking between gulps of air. For a terrifying moment, Daniel slipped beneath the surface. Darkness closed in lungs searing. Then a tug at his jacket. Sharp, unrelenting. Max had his teeth clamped into the fabric, hauling him upward. The man was supposed to save the dog. But in that instant, it was the dog who saved the man. When they burst back into the open air, Daniel gasped, choking on river water. Max barked once, as if to say, "Not today. We're not done yet." And through the chaos, the cub's eyes met theirs, pleading, fading. This wasn't just a rescue anymore. It was a battle against the river itself. The current was merciless, the branch about to give way. Daniel and Max were caught between drowning and salvation. The question was no longer if they could reach the cub, but whether they could make it back alive once they did. The river roared like a living beast, swallowing every sound except its own fury. Daniel's body fought to stay upright, his rope the only line between survival and death. Each surge slammed against him with bone-crushing force, but still he pushed forward. And beside him, unbelievably, Max swam on ears, flat eyes fixed, muscles straining against the flood. The cub's cries grew weaker, swallowed by water. Its claws slipped the branch, creaking, like it would snap at any second. Daniel reached out, but the current jerked him sideways, twisting him under. Water filled his mouth, icy and merciless, dragging him down. Then came the tug again, Max, teeth locked into his jacket, refusing to let go. The dog kicked harder, thrashing until Daniel's head broke the surface. Gasping, choking, Daniel realized the truth. He wasn't leading this rescue. Max was. But the river wasn't finished. A massive log carried by the flood hurtled toward them like a missile. Daniel barely had time to shout before it smashed into the branch, splintering wood, hurling the cub into open water. Plot twist. The cub was no longer clinging. It was drowning. Through the chaos, spinning toward the tiny form tumbling downstream. Without hesitation, he lunged ahead, powerful strokes tearing against the current. Daniel's chest seized with terror. If Max missed, if Max got pulled under, there would be nothing he could do. For one heart-stopping moment, the GoldenDog vanished beneath the waves. Daniel screamed his name, the river answering with silence. Then there he was. Max burst upward, jaws gently clamped around the scruff of the cub's neck, holding it high above water. The rope tightened as Daniel kicked forward, pulling them closer. His lungs burned, his arms shook, but he had no choice. They had to make it back, or the river would claim all three. The lesson hit him in that chaos. Bravery isn't about having no fear. It's about leaping anyway, because something more precious than your fear depends on it. But the battle wasn't over. The cub was limp, barely breathing, and Max was spent. Even if they reached shore, the real fight would begin not against the river, but against death itself. They crashed onto the muddy bank in a tangle of limbs, rope, and fur. Daniel coughed violently, spitting out river water, but his eyes went straight to the tiny black bundle in Max's jaws. The cub lay limp. No sound. No movement. Daniel's stomach dropped. For a terrifying second, he thought they were too late. Please, no." His voice cracked as he pulled the cub onto the ground. Training took over, clear the airway, pressed gently on the chest. Water gurgled from the cub's mouth, but still no breath. Beside him, Max whined and licked at the cub's face, then pressed his warm body close as if to share his own heartbeat. It wasn't just Daniel fighting for the cub's life now. Max was fighting too. And then the danger grew sharper. A low rumble shook the air. Daniel froze, lifting his head. Just a few feet away, the mother bear towered above them, muscles taut, eyes blazing with fear and fury. One wrong move, and she would end him. Max moved first. He stood between Daniel and the bear, hackles raised, not in aggression, but in defiance, as if to say, "We're not enemies. Not today." Daniel's hands kept working. Compress. Pause. Compress. "Come on, little one," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Breathe." Minutes felt like hours. His arms burned, but he refused to stop. Then a miracle, weak at first, then stronger. A cough, a gasp. The cub's tiny chest rose and fell. Plot, twist, the cub lived. The bear roared, not in rage, but something else, something raw and guttural. Relief. Gratitude. Max's ears twitched, but he didn't back down. He held his ground as Daniel wrapped the cub in a blanket, checking its pulse, dribbling drops of clean water onto its mouth. The tiny creature whimpered, faint, but alive. Daniel exhaled his chest, aching tears stinging his eyes. He'd fought rivers before. He'd fought storms. But this battle wasn't against water, it was against hopelessness itself. And the lesson was clear. Sometimes saving a life means risking your own, and sometimes the line between friend and foe disappears when survival demands trust. But as the cub stirred and blinked, the real test was yet to come. Would the mother bear reclaim her cub in peace, or would instinct turn gratitude into danger? The cub blinked, weak but alive, its tiny chest rising in fragile rhythm. Daniel let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding, but the danger wasn't over. The mother bear stepped forward, her massive frame trembling, breath steaming in the cold air. Her eyes locked on Daniel, then on Max, then back to the cub. Instinct screamed at Daniel to run, but his legs felt nailed to the ground. One wrong move could still end in tragedy. And then came the twist. Instead of charging, the bear froze just a few feet away. She lowered her head, not in defeat, but in something closer to recognition. Max stood between them, golden fur, bristling gaze steady. He didn't bark this time. He didn't growl. He simply stood tall, as if offering himself as proof. "We mean no harm." The cub whimpered, stumbling weakly toward its mother. Daniel released it slowly, his hands trembling. Max stepped aside, letting the little one cross the short distance. The bear bent down, scooping her cub close, licking it fiercely, almost frantically, as though trying to erase every second of fear it had endured. But she didn't leave. She turned her massive head toward Max. For one eternal heartbeat, predator and protector stared at one another. And in that silence, Daniel realized something extraordinary. This wasn't just survival. This was gratitude. The bear's eyes softened. Her breathing steadied, and then, unthinkably, she nudged her cub forward closer to Max. Just for a moment. As if allowing a final acknowledgement of the bond that had saved its life. Daniel's chest ached. He had seen rescues before, but never this. Never a wild mother trusting enough to share her most precious gift with a dog. The lesson was undeniable. Real strength isn't about dominance. It's about trust. And sometimes trust is born in the very moment we're forced to let go of fear. With a final rumbling growl, less threat than farewell, the bear nudged her cub into the forest shadows, vanishing into the trees. Daniel collapsed onto the mud, exhausted. Max pressed against his side, his warm weight a reminder that sometimes the bravest heart doesn't beat in a man's chest at all. As the forest swallowed the bear and her cub, Daniel knew the valley would never feel the same. The river had taken its toll, but it had also given something back. A lesson carried not by a man but by a dito named Max. And in the quiet that followed, he began to understand what that lesson truly meant. The forest grew silent again, as if the storm had never touched it. Daniel sat in the mud, his chest aching from exhaustion, but his gaze never left the golden Labrador lying faithfully at his side. Max's fur was soaked, his breathing heavy, yet his eyes were calm, steady, almost knowing. Daniel realized then that he had entered the river believing he was the rescuer. But the truth was undeniable. Max had saved him just as surely as he had saved the cub. Without the dog's courage, neither man nor animal would have seen another sunrise. The river had threatened to take everything. Instead, it gave something back, an unshakable reminder that heroes do not always wear uniforms or carry tools. Sometimes they walk quietly beside us, waiting for the moment when their heart speaks louder than fear. As the evening sun dipped low, the valley glowed with a strange new warmth. Daniel rested a hand on Max's head, whispering words that needed no reply. "You're the real reason we all made it out alive." The lesson was clear, and timeless storms will come. Rivers will rage, but trust and loyalty can carve miracles out of chaos. And sometimes the bravest heart in the valley beats inside a dog. If this story moved, you take a moment to share it with someone who needs hope today. And if you believe animals like Max deserve to have their stories told, support this channel by hitting leaving your thoughts in the comments and pressing subscribe so you never miss another tale of courage, trust, and second chances. Because here, every story reminds us of one truth: the smallest act of loyalty can change the course of a life.